It's funny. Nevada spokespersons tempered down stories of greed, graft, skimming, and even murder in the state's early casino days. But today, casinos like the El Cortez in Las Vegas have billboards that proclaim Bugsy Siegel slept here. Go figure. As we all know, casinos, gambling, and money make for strange bedfellows, and they make for murder, too. But one of Nevada's greatest mysteries unfolded in the 1930s when Reno Riverside bank cashier Roy Frisch disappeared. In the late 1920s, Bill Graham and Jim McKay ran casinos in many of George Wingfield's buildings. Wingfield was already the richest man in Nevada, but he got a healthy cut of the profits every Wednesday as he walked with a guard from property to property. What he didn't get a piece of was the money Graham and McKay made from swindles and manipulative stock deals where dozens of rich marks were taken for millions of dollars. But Wingfield's bank and the Riverside Hotel sure made things handy. Graham and McKay were the backbones of Wingfield's operations, and nobody said no to them. So when they asked for a special safety deposit box in the fictitious name of Mr. Morrissey, the head cashier, Roy Frisch, obliged. And while he'd always been an honorable man, he looked the other way when he had to. In the early 30s, while bandits like John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, and Pretty Boy Floyd were perfect newspaper clickbait for a nation suffering the Great Depression, Reno was a place to get away from your troubles. And Reno bosses Graham and McKay offered money laundering in their casinos for gangsters like Alvin Creepy Karpus, Fred Barker, his brother Arthur, and even Ma Barker, who liked to go to the flicker shows while Graham sent hijacking and bank robbery loot around town and collected a 25% fee to return clean bills to his crooked friends. And it wasn't a small amount of money we're talking about here. On June 15, 1933, the Barker Karpus gang kidnapped Minnesota brewer William Ham. He was released after the $100,000 ransom was paid, and Creepy Karpus and the gang brought $95,000 to Bill Graham. That's about $2.25 million in today's dollars. Graham kept 24,000. Roy Frisch was a good banker, and the head cashier back then was more like a bank manager today. Still, when the boss says to do something, you do it. You don't want to wind up with a stocking full of coal on Christmas Day, or get hit by a stocking full of coal. Frisch dressed well. He served honorably in the First World War, and was a Reno City Councilman and the Washoe County Assessor before going to work for George Wingfield at the Riverside Bank. Graham and McKay were local political fixers and had a huge hand in getting casino gaming legalized in 1931. They ran things the way they wanted and owned the Bank Club Casino on Center Street, the largest and most profitable club in the state. They also owned the Stockade, a horseshoe-shaped building along the Truckee River, just a couple of blocks from the casinos. There were 100 rooms for the girls and their dates. 20 minutes of friendship started at $3. When Arthur Doc Barker showed up after his gang's next kidnapping of St. Paul banker Edward Bremer, things got a little dicey. He had nearly $200,000 in cash, about $5 million in today's money. And as Karpus later said, we had all that cash, and it was hot. Boy, were we hot. The fucking FBI marked it so Graham wouldn't take it, even at a 50% discount. He wasn't stupid, but he was a good guy. He gave Doc $7,000 off the cuff to share with all of us. Graham and McKay built a reputation for being men of their word, so gangsters flocked to the town, stayed in cheap apartments, and laid low for months. They bought cars, plotted new capers, and spent their stolen cash. One of those on the lam after several bank heists and shootouts with police and feds was George Babyface Nelson. A man unaware of anyone else's pain, he killed at the slightest provocation and with no remorse. Over 5 years, he worked with several gangs, including an 8-man bunch headed by John Dillinger, and after escaping from Joliet State Penitentiary in 1932, Nelson arrived in Reno and found Graham, who took an instant liking to him. Graham sent him to the Calneva Lodge at Lake Tahoe to work with Tex Hall, and then found him a house near his own. When the home was ready, Nelson moved in less than a block from Graham and went to work as his driver and bodyguard in Reno. the families dined together, but Babyface couldn't guard his new boss against the feds. Police and government agents caught up with Graham and McKay, charging them with mail fraud, since crooked payments were made via the mail. After ducking charges in their first trial, Graham and McKay were back in federal court in New York in 1934. By March, it appeared they were toast. The feds had a star witness ready to testify, but Nelson knew who it was. On March 21st and 22nd of 34, Babyface and sidekick Paul Chase were cruising Reno, looking for the Fed's star witness. Riverside cashier Roy Frisch told his sister and mother, whom he lived with at 247 Court Street, that he was going to the Majestic Theater to see a show. Many people later swore they saw Frisch before or after the show, but he never made it home. An intense manhunt followed, but Frisch was never seen again. In the ensuing months, a car reportedly used by Babyface and Paul Chase turned up in San Francisco. It was burned by bootleggers Fatso Negri and Tony Moreno to hide bloodstains. In late November in Barrington, Illinois, Nelson, his wife Helen, and John Paul Chase encountered FBI agents who opened fire. Their car was quickly a bullet-ridden mess, and Nelson was hit, but he pushed his wife towards a grassy field, then went back to the car, grabbed a fresh rifle from the back seat, and walked directly at the two FBI agents, firing with each step. He killed them both. Nelson died soon after. Helen Gillis was arrested days later. Chase escaped. John Paul Chase was a semi-pro baseball player in Sausalito before becoming a bootlegger and partnering with Nelson, so he returned to Northern California to hide out. Unfortunately for JP, he was on the FBI's top criminal list, and Chief of Police Al Roberts of Mount Shasta figured he'd return to where he worked years before. When he did, Roberts found him on the 27th of December 1934 and arrested him. Then he called the FBI. The government threw its weight behind the prosecution in quick order, and Chase was tried and convicted just 4 months later. He was given a life sentence for the killing of 2 U.S. federal agents, and he wound up on the Rock, Alcatraz. Once Graham and McKay were finally convicted in 1937 and sent to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, the FBI arranged for Chase, who had by then admitted that he and Nelson had killed Frisch, to be taken to the Spanish Springs Ranch owned by George Wingfield, where he said he and Nelson put the already dead Frisch in a shallow grave and covered him with lime. Chase's story was that they had staked out Frisch, and Nelson thumped him in the head with the butt of his gun as he was walking alone after the show. They threw him in a car and drove to Sparks, where he escaped the back seat and tried to run through the train yard. Nelson shot him after he fell. Although Chase walked through brush and trees for hours, he was unable to find the spot the body was buried nearly 4 years earlier. While at Alcatraz, Chase took up drawing, showing some talent. When Alcatraz was shut down, Chase was sent to Leavenworth, where he drew parole on Halloween 1966. He was back in the San Francisco Bay Area working as a custodian when he died 7 years later. Bill Graham and James McKay were released from prison after 9 years. By that time, Elmer Bones Remmer had run the Calneva Lodge at Lake Tahoe into a quagmire of unpaid bills and taxes due. They let Bones handle the sale of the property and concentrated on their bank club casino in Reno. With Jack Sullivan running the club, Graham earned $1,280,000 while in Leavenworth, about $25 million in today's cash. His accountants managed and paid the taxes on the dough while he was behind bars. But by the late 1940s, Harold's Club was leading the way in Reno, and eventually had thousands of billboards across the globe stating Harold's Club or bust. By the time Bill Graham came home to Reno, most of his connections were gone or reluctant to cooperate with him. Still, there was money to be sent to friends in Chicago after receiving cash for a large piece of the bank club pie. A few years later, John Drew got a share of the club, and he handled getting the cash to Chicago for Tony Accardo. Bill Graham bought out partner McKay's shares in the bank club and later pocketed over $3 million when he sold out. Graham died in 1965. Thanks so much for watching Nevada Gaming History's look at the disappearance of Roy Frisch. And for more detailed casino stories from Reno and Lake Tahoe, pick up Mob City Reno on Amazon.